Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Jim Powell, Editorial Director at TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about pain points of moving data to the cloud and strategies for success. Our sponsors are Alation, Couchbase, and Delphix. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Fern Halper with TDWI. After Fern speaks, we have a roundtable with Ibby Rahmani of Alation, Doug Smith of Delphix, and Mark Gamble of Couchbase. But before I turn over the time to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of their presentations, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type it in and send it over. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window, and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we are recording today's events, and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you choose, or share it with a colleague. Okay, again, today we're going to be talking about pain points of moving data to the cloud and strategies for success. Our first speaker is Fern Halper, PhD, TDWI Vice President and Senior Director of TDWI Research for Advanced Analytics. Well known in the analytics community, Fern has published hundreds of articles, research reports, speeches, and webinars on data mining and information technology during the past 20 years. Fern is also co-author of several dummies books on cloud computing, the hybrid cloud, and big data. At TDWI, she focuses on advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, social media analysis, text analytics, cloud computing, and big data analytics approaches. She has been a partner at industry analyst firm Hurwitz & Associates and a lead analyst for Bell Labs. Her PhD is from Texas A&M University. Fern, I'll turn things over to you here.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on pain points of moving data to the cloud and strategies for success. We know that you're busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes kicking things off. I'll talk about the how and why organizations are moving to the cloud and some of the challenges that we're having. And then, as Jim mentioned, this is all about a roundtable discussion. So we're going to spend a good chunk of time talking about best practices for moving data to the cloud and be thinking about your questions because we're going to take audience Q&A at the end. Okay, so here's what we see at TDWI. And that is that first, data is becoming more complex and analytics is becoming more advanced. So in a 2021 survey, we asked respondents, what kind of data is your organization managing now and will they manage in the next year? And you could see that the green is managing now and the purple is going to manage in the next year. And of course, we see things like structured data and transactional data and log data. All of those have very big bars. But what's interesting here is that if you look in the middle of the chart, you see things like internal text data. That's at close to 40% already managing that. Going further down on the list, you see things like machine data, close to 20%, and semi-structured data in the middle there at like 42%. So the top reason that we see organizations starting to manage all of this complex data is because of analytics. They want to move past reports and dashboards. Self-service is a big priority for many in our audience, and machine learning is also becoming more popular. We see increasing demand for that. It's already in the mainstream of adoption. And more advanced analytics like machine learning and AI are iterative and compute intensive. And so that often requires a different platform than the traditional data warehouse. So some of this data is already in the cloud. Maybe some machine data, text data. You may already have data in the cloud. Some of it's going to be on premises. So how do you ensure that that data is actually migrated properly? We'll talk about those sorts of things today. And as more organizations are looking to move to the cloud, as I said, they're looking to move there for analytics and other use cases. What we see happening is that they're actually moving their data management capabilities to the cloud as well. So this chart comes from that same survey that we did in 2021, and we asked, what data management and analytics tools does your organization currently use? Please select all that apply. And I circled this in red. You could see that the data warehouse in the cloud and the data lake in the cloud are both at over 30%. So they're already in the mainstream of adoption. We also see multi-cloud taking hold. And multi-cloud is where you use one or more cloud services provider to furnish the services you want. So you may use AWS for one type of service. You might use another cloud service provider, Google, Microsoft, another, for another type of cloud service. It's a services-based model. The idea is to use sort of, the best of what you want from each cloud provider. And we see at TDWI, we see organizations on average now are using, for those that use the cloud, are using on average 2 cloud providers. So the idea is to take advantage of the feature and services of each cloud provider where it suits the workload, to support backup, or you need a certain cloud provider for a certain region, for example. And it can help to prevent vendor lock-in and there's a lot of other benefits, but it also has issues, and we'll talk about that at the roundtable as well. So there are numerous benefits to cloud data platforms. The first is that the cloud is scalable and it's elastic. So that means it scales up and down as needed. So as you advance your analytics using this diverse data that I was talking about, if you want to train a machine learning model, for example, you can spin up a cloud instance for this compute intensive type of workload and then scale it down, when you're done with that. It also makes organizations more agile. You have support for new data and data types, as I talked about, all of this diverse data that's either generated in the cloud or data like unstructured data. We see organizations using tools like machine learning and deep learning to go against some of these newer data types, building IoT applications and so on. As I said, it makes organizations more agile because it separates compute from storage, so whereas many databases already do this, but some of the platforms like Hadoop don't necessarily do it. So, if you were going to scale one up, you had to scale the other up. It supports new innovations, on the cloud because there are services that the providers provide. You have compute resources and so on. You get the idea, and it gives you support for modern analytics. And as I was mentioning, the traditional data warehouse often has trouble supporting advanced analytics. And that's not to say that organizations don't use the traditional warehouse for advanced analytics. They do, and they do it primarily with structured data. But what we see is that ultimately, they feel that they're going to move, to another platform to help to enhance that, especially as I mentioned, because the cloud is good for compute intensive and iterative tasks. So there's numerous benefits to cloud data platforms. And what we also see is that COVID is accelerating the change, this move to cloud data platforms. So we ask in every survey that we can, how has COVID changed, the way you do business? Is it changing your adoption of certain technologies? And the cloud is one of those where there's an accelerated change. COVID organizations are going to be adopting it quicker. They've sped up their timetable. That's not to say there aren't pain points also, and that's what we're going to talk about today. For example, organizations face the challenge of skills for new environments. A lot of organizations we talk to, they say, I wish I would have planned better for the skills that I'm going to need. They may need pipelining skills or infrastructure skills. They're moving to a new platform. So, skills can become a pain point. Things like data classification, you're moving to this new environment that's the cloud. You may have had your data, I don't know, in a data lake on premises. It may have been one of those older ones where you basically dump that data in there. And now, for whatever reason, you're going to move to the cloud. You have to deal with, some of the issues associated with that data. Tied in right there is data governance and building trust and quality in the data. We see at TDWI that data governance is one of the major pain points that organizations have when they move to the cloud. It's also something that they cite as a very high priority because, in some of these new environments, whether they be a unified data lake and data warehouse or a cloud data warehouse or a cloud data lake, you have to be able to trust the data that's in that environment. You have to put together a plan. Also, we see organizations sometimes doing a lift and shift, and, that oftentimes doesn't work very well. We would advise doing a phase kind of plan. Also, legacy systems, and we'll talk about a lot of these things in our roundtable, dealing with legacy systems, which may be great because, they're solving the problem on premises, but you also want to be able to marry that data potentially with other data that's in the cloud. So those are just 5 of the pain points that organizations are dealing with. I'm wondering if they sound familiar to people, and we're going to talk about them. So let's start doing that. Jim, let me turn it back over to you, and you can introduce our sponsors for the fireside chat.
Thank you, Fern. Just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have a question, you can enter it at any time in the Ask a Question window. We'll be answering audience questions in the final portion of our program. So let's begin our roundtable. Joining us today is Ibby Rahmani, Director of Product Marketing at Alation, and an industry veteran with more than 15 years of experience in marketing. He's worked for Waterline, now Hitachi Vantara, JFrog, and VMware, where he launched various marketing initiatives around data and cloud. Ibby has an MBA from Said Business School at the University of Oxford, UK. Mark Gamble is Product and Solutions Marketing Director with Couchbase. Mark is a passionate product marketer with a technical and solution consulting background and more than 20 years of experience in enterprise and open source technology. He has launched several database and analytics solutions throughout his career and has worked with customers across a wide variety of industries, including financial services, automotive, hospitality, high-tech, and healthcare. With an expertise in analytics and AI, Mark loves all things data and is an emphatic supporter of Data for Good initiatives. Doug Smith is Global Practice Director, DevOps CI/CD with Delphix. Doug manages all aspects of the company's business and technology partnerships with AWS, Azure, Google, IBM, and Oracle. His background has technical roots in open and distributed systems and includes leadership roles in IT infrastructure and operations, IT strategy consulting and services, and enterprise software sales and implementation. Welcome to you all. Fern, let's start with the first question for our group. Fern, I think you're on mute. Fern, you're still on mute. Doug, there we go. Fern, is that you? Doug, I'm going to start with the first question while we get our technical difficulties out of the way.
Okay.
We have large amounts of data we want to move to the cloud. What options do we have to accelerate the initial movement, loading, and ongoing synchronization?
Fairly common question across all of the customers that I've interacted with. Certainly each of the cloud providers, provides some solutions to move and migrate data from a variety of sources from an on-premise location, et cetera. But one of the things, and actually Fern had mentioned it, was the skills challenge. So if you're going to leverage or utilize those individual tools, understanding and knowing each of those nuances of each of the cloud providers' tools to do that can be quite a cumbersome challenge. At Delphix, we provide the ability to synchronize with source data on-premise. Moving data or data portability has really been a foundational capability of our platform since its launch in 2010. The cloud, for the most part, from our perspective, is really just another location. Our customers have been moving data between, network segments within a single data center, multiple data centers across geographic boundaries, et cetera, and doing that in a secured fashion. So the ability to move that data, synchronize with that source, say synchronize with the source, compress the data, and then move a much smaller amount of data on an initial one-time, transfer, and then on an ongoing basis, looking at only the change data that's occurred on that source, on those source elements, and then moving that efficiently in a secured method is really the foundation of our capability. Additionally, because the movement of data, outside of a premise location to any other location has security concerns, we also have the ability to mask sensitive information. That could be PCI data, PII data, and mask that data or obfuscate that sensitive data prior to moving it, so that when it arrives at the desired location, you can be assured that it's safe, secure, et cetera.
Thanks. Here's our next question. How can enterprises accelerate cloud migration?
Can you hear me now?
Let's turn that one to you. Yes, you're back. Thank you.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that. All right. I don't know what went on there, but I'm back now. So thanks, Jim, for taking over. So I'm sure that there was a great answer to question one. Let's move on to question two. So as I mentioned, COVID has been ramping up the timetable for organizations to move to the cloud. I also mentioned that organizations sometimes struggle to put together a strategy and a plan for migration. So how do you accelerate migration? Ibby, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. So before we answer that question, we really need to understand why most enterprises struggle with cloud migration. And according to an independent report, many companies are making the move to the cloud, but most are not successful. And that is because cloud migration projects are taking a lot of time. In most cases, it's taking more than a year, and nobody wants to do that. So, when we look, why are enterprises faced with this kind of dilemma, we need to understand the two things that impede them toward the cloud migration. First is intelligence around the data. Do they think they need to move all the data to the cloud, or do they even have visibility into the data that is going to be moved into the cloud? So that's the first challenge they have. The second challenge they have is their ability to provide consistent service. A user, a data consumer who's using the data wants access to the data no matter where the data resides, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, and during the migration journey, they want that access. So that really slows things down for people. So in short, cloud migration is very tricky for most enterprises. And then for the longest time, what we thought, right, we thought that if we bridge the gap between business users and IT, we can help accelerate the cloud migration. This is true. This is part one of the situation. However, when we look at the business users, we see they do have some sense of what the data is there and the data needs. And IT needs that data information so that they can make the right decision to make that move. However, in most cases, they're incentivized to move using physical technology. For example, let's move things from storage A, then storage B, and that slows down things. And when we were talking about the business users who had the intelligence into the cloud, into the data, what we have realized is the reality is a little different. In fact, they didn't have that kind of understanding we thought they did before moving to the cloud. As a matter of fact, they would love some insights on where the data is, how the data is being used, what data is popular, so they can provide that insight into the IT user. And this is where Alation comes in. First thing it does is it auto-translates technical language into human language. We were talking about bridging the gap, so that helps the understanding of the data and helps bridge the gap. And second, through machine learning, what Alation does is it delivers insights into the usage pattern. And what that does is it helps users understand what data is actively used, what data is used the most, especially to the business user. And as a result, this gives them much better understanding of what is relevant for migration. And this knowledge can be passed to IT so that they can prioritize the move to the cloud, and they can be strategic about it, and IT can leverage only active, relevant data assets to move to the cloud. And what they can do is they can see the top users, so they can say, top use data. They can say, hey, we're using only 10% of the data. Let's move these 10%, and then we'll deal with the next 10%. And they can have a strategic way of moving the data and migrating the data where the active data is migrated first. Now, when we talk about the users who need access to the data throughout the cloud migration journey, they just need visibility. So when we talk about Alation, what we do is we connect to a wide range of data sources. We heard earlier talking about traditional data sources, modern data sources. We connect to on-prem and the cloud, whether it's BI, databases, data lakes, and many sources, and we provide that intel to our users. So as the data is being moved to the cloud, they are not impacted. They have understanding of the data.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In terms of understanding what data actually makes sense to move to the cloud, that could certainly help to accelerate the migration journey. Doug or Mark, do you have anything that you want to add to this question?
I think I agree 100%. Really, it was well put, and making sure sort of your data house is in order before you start the move to the cloud, and making those kind of intelligent decisions. What does need to be moved to the cloud? What might ostensibly be better left on-prem, for example? Maybe highly secure data, these kinds of things. But I think the answer was very well put, and I agree.
Well, let me ask you this question then, Mark. Is a managed service a good idea? So, for instance, should organizations consider things like database as a service, or go with a cloud, or go with a self-managed database running on the cloud, or maybe they should do both?
Yeah, great question. Once you've made this commitment as an organization to move data storage and processing from on-prem to the cloud, that's the classic kind of first decision point these days. Do you go with a DBaaS or spin up your own IaaS environments and install your own databases? And the answer is the classic, it depends. But I'll try to break it down. Ostensibly, both options provide the scale and elasticity that you require, and both will spare you the expense of establishing and running an on-prem, bare metal data center, which are probably primary reasons for migrating data to the cloud in the first place. So at that point, then the questions sort of change. First, do you have in-house dedicated database management expertise? For SMBs or organizations that don't have dedicated IT resources, database as a service can be a really great option. It allows you to quickly provision database instances on the fly. It removes the need for managing database installation, maintenance, backups, upgrades. The service provides all that for you. And another advantage is that DBaaS provides support and SLAs for resolving problems and outages. Again, sort of taking those responsibilities off of your plate. And depending on the pricing model, DBaaS can also provide more predictable costs as well. The trade-off, however, is that depending on your DBaaS vendor, you often aren't in complete control of the physical infrastructure. that your database lives on, and in many cases, not even the virtual infrastructure. And that means you don't have access to granular components of the system, such as underlying microservices or APIs. This all said, if your organization has dedicated IT resources and you're able to manage the environment, you may prefer or even require direct control over the database infrastructure, which would lead you to that sort of self-managed database model. Another question you need to ask, it's already come up a couple of times in comments, how sensitive is the data that you need to house? In many cases, a DBAS runs on the vendor's own infrastructure, so you need to be careful about things like data privacy, data sovereignty, regulations for global applications. And if you choose the self-managed model, you retain all control as well as responsibility for the data, but you can ensure its security by leveraging these strategies like virtual private clouds. And to the sort of last point of the question, whether both options make sense to pursue at once, they do, I think, from the standpoint of a hybrid cloud architecture. So, Fern, probably everybody knows this. Fern, you've done papers and studies on a hybrid cloud strives to isolate and shift computing and storage between, private cloud resources and public cloud resources with this goal of achieving this optimal balance between security and privacy and scale and reliability. And many organizations pursuing the hybrid model run their pervasive applications with non-sensitive data, such as online catalogs and videos, things like that, using a DBAS for its ease of deployment, automated maintenance, and support SLAs. But they might run their mission-critical applications with sensitive data, such as HR applications, on self-managed cloud deployments in a VPC for its higher level of granular control, privacy, and security. And I have to mention that Couchbase is cloud native and really supports all three of these options. So Couchbase Server is a NoSQL distributed document database that fully supports containerization and can be installed on any IaaS infrastructure. And we also offer Couchbase Cloud, which is a fully managed DBAS for Couchbase Server. And it deploys, this is important because it's a distinction for Couchbase Cloud versus other DBAS vendors. It deploys into your own virtual private cloud. And so we're really striving to help eliminate those data security concerns that I mentioned. And it natively connects to any other Couchbase server running anywhere for replication, and it allows you to access, replicate, and migrate data across the entire Couchbase ecosystem that you could potentially build. Our XDCR, cross data center replication features how customers migrate to the cloud. It's built right into the infrastructure of the database, and it's this ability to create a single ecosystem of connected Couchbase clusters that's kind of central to the hybrid concept. It allows our customers to house and process data where it makes the most sense for the application and the security requirements.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's definitely, not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to cloud. I mean, I talk to people out there, practitioners all the time, and a lot of times, many times, there's all different implementations. Everyone pretty much agrees, that hybrid, there is sort of a hybrid model, but what that looks like is going to vary, between companies. Don't know if anyone else had anything else they wanted to add to that question. If not.
Yeah, so certainly, as Mark said, one of the things that we see is certain application dependencies kind of drive that decision. So certain packaged applications, require, access to the database server itself, which, would then preclude it to moving to an IaaS scenario. Perhaps, custom or homegrown developed applications that don't have some of those dependencies can lend themselves more to that database as a service type of offering. The key is that as those decisions are being rationalized and made, that you select, platforms and tools that can support you regardless of where you choose to operate. So whether you have data that lends itself into a DBAS scenario, you still have on-premise data, you have data on IaaS in cloud or multi-cloud scenarios, you want to make sure that you have selected, tooling and technologies and a strategy that allows you to manage and run that data consistently. And that's certainly, one of the foundations of our platform is to provide that level of independence and agnostic approach to managing that data, securing that data, regardless of where you choose to run it.
Yeah, let's go to this next question, which is about security. I actually want all of you to answer this, because I mentioned, and it's already come up a couple times already, I mentioned this issue of dealing with sensitive data, migrating that data to the cloud. What are your thoughts about security and availability? How can we secure sensitive data that we intend to move or migrate and keep it secure moving forward? So Doug, do you want to take that one first, and then maybe Ibby and then Mark?
Yeah, so certainly, a foundation capability of our platform has been to obfuscate or mask sensitive data. Sensitive, is a broad categorization. Certainly, we think of personally identifiable information, names, addresses, phone numbers, credit card information, et cetera. Without question, the ability to obfuscate or mask that data prior to movement, but also preserving the format. So, as a consumer of data, whether I'm a developer, a tester, in some cases even data scientists who may want access to real data in some circumstances, but need to or shouldn't see other sensitive information for other purposes. The flexibility to obfuscate and or mask that data based on the constituents or consumer's need is important. And also, again, preserving that format if necessary, if it's a developer or a tester, because as you might imagine, they would like to see a first name, a last name, an address, et cetera. So an ability to obfuscate or mask that data, to desensitize it, but also preserve that format, and then doing that consistently across the enterprise, because again, we live in an environment today where, in the past it may have been one application talks to one data set. Today, that application, which may be, on your mobile device, actually may speak to multiple databases in the background or multiple data types in the background. Ensuring as you, iterate through development and releases of that, ensuring that you can mask data consistently across all of those data sets for referential integrity, ensuring that when, the update to your mobile app works as you would expect it to as a consumer, those are the types of things that you need to focus on.
Yeah, rest in transit and in use. Ibby, how about you? What's your view about security and availability and securing sensitive data, as you migrate into the cloud?
Yeah, this is paramount to any user, security and availability. When we go to cloud, we are moving critical information, and what we have seen in the journey is that people start with easy applications, as we heard before, and then they start putting in information that could be vital. And to add to this, with new compliance rules, everything about an individual could become very critical, and we need to secure that. And the best way to do it is first let people have their own technology to secure it around the data that they have, whatever the technology they're using in-house. But at the end of the day, we have no control of data in the cloud. So what we want to do is we want to use our own technology, whether using protocols like AES 256 or TLS 1.2, and protect the data, whether it's at rest or in motion. And then finally, when the data is at rest, you want to also make sure that you have threats from internal audience as well, people as well, not just people coming from outside. So what it is you can have one department that can have access to PII information, another department that might not have access to it. So how do you protect against that? And that was something that was talked about earlier, where you authenticate those data. Maybe you have a database where you have all columns and rows that's showing you, but when it comes to PII information, that's been authenticated. So there are different ways to manage it, and definitely we support all these different technologies. In fact, if I were to talk about Alation, we are certified against ISO 27001, so we provide security from that point of view.
Great. Mark, how about you? What's your view on this?
Sure. I first agreed with my esteemed co-presenters and definitely have some similar thoughts. First, data should always be stored and managed using encryption, like TLS, SSL, some of the things that were just mentioned. both on the wire to protect data as it's sent from clients to a cluster or between clusters, and when it's at rest to prevent unauthorized access. And systems should also have RBAC, role-based access control, to isolate and secure even down to the row or field level what people can see. And you should also make sure your system provides auditing to track all user activity in a cluster, including logon attempts. So data breach attempts can be identified and stopped. But it's really sort of the second part of the question, the actual migration process itself, where security can sometimes be most at risk, during the migration. So when migrating data to the cloud, there are really a multitude of methods and options that you can follow, depending on your database technology. And for many, it might involve, something simple. They might want to just export and import, where the data is exported to files from the on-prem system, and then the files are imported to the target system in the cloud. But this method, while seemingly simplest, really brings the obvious security risks, because the data is likely not encrypted during the transfer. And similarly, using third-party ETL tools or utilities may leave, depending on who you use, security holes that could be subject to things like man-in-the-middle attacks. And so to ensure data security during migration while the data is in transit, always look for migration features that might be, from my esteemed colleagues' products or from the database technology vendor. For example, Couchbase customers leverage our built-in replication feature called XDCR, cross data center replication, that facilitates data migration from on-prem clusters to the cloud and between cloud clusters. And this is because it encrypts the data in transit from end to end. You can even use root certificates for the origin and destination clusters as an added measure of security during migration. And because XDCR streams the data and can automatically recover from latency or network failure, you're not going to suffer from timeouts or data loss when migrating large volumes of data. And lastly, to adhere to data privacy regulations, make sure your database has the capability to take advantage of the distributed nature of the cloud. You can distribute, manage, and isolate data, for example, in specific regions in order to comply with things like GDPR or CCPA. You can achieve these things. If you can achieve these things, I think you're going to have a secure migration path.
Yeah, you all brought up really, really good points, I have to say. And, I've just add that, some cloud vendors, if you're going that route, they will provide security, but you have to make sure that you ask for it, otherwise, like even for the data at rest, otherwise, it's a service, and don't assume anything. Like always ask questions, about what you're getting. Okay, so I mentioned multi-cloud in my opening comments, and, we see that companies are concerned about vendor lock-in, as they move to the cloud. So, Doug, is multi-cloud how they avoid vendor lock-in? Companies may want the ability to move or use cloud services that make the most sense to them. Does that cause additional problems like, managing multi-cloud? I mean, how do you think that we avoid vendor lock-in?
Well, certainly, I think, again, the selections that the, customers make or consumer makes relative to the services that they consume in each of those cloud, vendors' offerings kind of dictate, what level of investment you're making both short-term and long-term in that particular cloud provider. We talked a little bit about that database as a service type of offering outside of, like a Couchbase scenario where that is present and available across all cloud platforms. That's one way that you select a platform that is cloud agnostic, that gives you the flexibility to move, to a different cloud provider or platform based on different criteria, cost, performance, whatever that might be. The other thing is, as you look at the database as a service types of offerings, more and more, those are the types of offerings that, the cloud vendors themselves are using to lure and make those offerings more sticky. So, again, that should be part of the criteria when, as a consumer, you're making that decision is, if I use that service, is that service using generally available capabilities or technologies that are present and available across any cloud platform that allow me the freedom and flexibility to move, et cetera. And then again, just making sure that, when you make decisions about using technologies, tools, or platforms, are those consistent and available across any of the cloud platforms that you may be looking to operate in? But we certainly see an evolution of our customers who initially made investments in a single cloud service provider that now are looking more strategically at the various services that are available in each, and then investing and using and leveraging those services across multiple vendors based on their capabilities.
Yeah, makes sense. Ibby or Mark, do you have anything you want to add?
I'll only add that Doug said my addition for me. So well put on the Couchbase side of things, Doug.
Sure.
And really, that's the kind of the theme of Couchbase is being cloud agnostic and cloud native. We've got many customers that are replicating from Azure to AWS, for example, on Couchbase Cloud, so that if any one side were to fail or they had to move, it's already replicated in the other IaaS providers. So well put, Doug, and nothing to add on top of that.
Right, and disaster recovery, of course, is another benefit of multi-cloud. Ibby, it looked like you wanted to say something also.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm not in a position to say which provider to choose, but from a user point of view, depending on what they want, if they want to do more DevOps, they might want to explore a certain cloud vendor. If they're doing more machine learning, then they explore a certain kind of cloud vendor. If you do a research within half an hour, you will realize that certain cloud vendors, they might be better at one area than the other area. And from a user point of view, this is the reason what you were talking earlier, that people are going towards multi-cloud. They're realizing that we can't be just on one cloud, and we need to have a multi-cloud environment because our developers or our data users are using getting different benefits from different clouds.
Right. I would just say, and I mentioned this very briefly when I had my opening remarks, but if you're moving to a multi-cloud, and using vendors across multi-cloud, some vendors will provide management functionality that sort of goes across the clouds. Maybe it's just for the services that they provide, but now you're managing multiple environments, too, which you have to be careful about that and make sure that you can actually manage across AWS and Azure or whatever you're using. So that's something that people are starting to talk more about. Of course, organizations aren't just making use of relational database management systems in the cloud. There are newer models like NoSQL databases. So, Mark, can you take this question? Is the NoSQL database a good option for the cloud? Why is it a good option? And, what about its bearing on relational databases?
Sure, we hear this a lot. So Couchbase is NoSQL, so I will definitely field this question. And I think from a generic standpoint, NoSQL is an ideal option for moving to the cloud because NoSQL technology, most of them adhere to this distributed cluster-based architecture. And that's well suited to take advantage of the regionally distributed nature of most cloud service providers. And, for example, deploying clusters across regions for better performance or disaster recovery. NoSQL databases also typically adhere to this concept of a shared nothing architecture, where each server node in the cluster operates independently of every other node. And with that model, the system doesn't have to go through a master or check in with every other node in order to respond to a query. Response times are fast because they're served from whichever node is in the nearest proximity to the client or most convenient to meet the request. So another advantage of NoSQL is resilience and scale. Scaling up or scaling out is as easy as provisioning, spinning up additional nodes in the cluster and just letting them sync with the other nodes. And if a given node goes down and the other nodes in the cluster, they just continue to process data and serve requests. This is just a generic nature of NoSQL technology. So the combination of a cloud environment where infrastructure can be quickly provisioned and discarded fits perfectly with the NoSQL distributed shared nothing architecture. But it's the second point that can be a hot button when it comes to NoSQL, what's its bearing on relational, if you're going to migrate from one to the other. And this is because of NoSQL's differences from relational database management systems. NoSQL is based on key values or documents versus tables and rows. NoSQL is schemaless. Any data can be stored in any record. And this is in order to achieve, high operational speed and provide flexibility for developers. And many NoSQL technologies don't support relational constructs like SQL or joins. So the assumption might be that migrating from relational to NoSQL is a huge hurdle, where you have to learn new query languages and new paradigms, but that's not the case if you choose the right NoSQL technology. So Couchbase has a distinction of supporting SQL and joins and aggregations and ACID transactions, all these trappings of the relational system. And in our version 7 coming here in a couple of months, it offers what we call scopes and collections. And these map directly to relational schemas and tables. So our adherence to relational constructs and conventions means developers don't have to clear these learning hurdles. They can continue to leverage existing skill sets, and it makes migrating from relational systems to NoSQL on Couchbase easier than with any other NoSQL technology. And then very briefly on the final part of the question, analytics. This is another good one because most NoSQL technologies really aren't optimized for analytics. A lot of them require an ETL process to an analytics database or data warehouse or something of that nature. And it's typically required for analyzing data stored in a NoSQL system. But we've recognized that at Couchbase, and we provide a built-in MPP-based analytics service out of the box. And that eliminates the need for movement of data into a separate layer for analysis and allows for the running of analytical and operational workloads on that single platform, no ETL required. So the ability to ingest, consolidate, and analyze data from multiple clusters, even from external sources like S3 on AWS. And with Couchbase, you query the data using standard SQL. So this analytics service, I think, is also ideally suited for BI tools. I use BI tools on our analytics service all the time, even for our internal analysis. And it's all designed to provide real-time responsiveness for data visualizations and dashboards. And if you're interested, I wrote a blog on this very topic at blog.couchbase.com.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, it seems like there is definitely a movement. People realize, SQL isn't going anywhere, so let's be able to use it on, different platforms. Anyone else have anything to add about the NoSQL question, or can move on to probably the hardest question of the bunch, or?
In preparation for that, just to kind of accentuate, certainly I think a cloud migration strategy almost inherently involves some rationalization or consideration for modernization, or modernization could be a key component, to the cloud migration. And that in and of itself has really led a lot of organizations to look at, the traditional transaction systems that, a structured RDBMS has provided up to that point. And they're looking at some of the inhibitors, obstacles to scalability, performance, et cetera. And it's almost a natural evolution to say, okay, you know what, if we're going to look at a cloud migration and modernization effort, then let's take a look at the new data platform types to see how that, might be the platform of the future for us.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing is, as people are looking into the cloud, the cost dynamics changes as well. So when they're looking into things like NoSQL, what they realize is they're using less space. Obviously, there are experts over here who can talk about why that happened. And as a result of that, it makes it even a more compelling story to look into NoSQL as an option.
Yeah, that's true. So here's our last hard question before we turn it over to audience Q&A. And, we always see at TDWI that data governance is the top priority and the top challenge for organizations, especially when they're moving to the cloud, because, now they're dealing with different platforms and different actors and everything. So, Ibby, let me ask you, how do organizations ensure governance and compliance in the cloud? Do we have all day? But no, just...
Okay. Yeah, so I'll try to keep it short, but transitioning from on-prem to the cloud could really change how the enterprise data is governed. So let me address this in two parts, right? So first, we need to understand what is needed to maintain governance policy in the cloud. And second is we need to ensure that we can reduce our compliance risks in the cloud. So we were talking about governance. When we talk about governance, we need to double down because governance is a very broad term. So we need to double down and need to understand what is it. And if I try to simplify it, we'll see that we really need to maintain our existing data quality rules in the cloud. We need to also manage the rules and policies along with it. And it might all seem simple in theory, but the real solution that can give us a bird's eye view of the whole environment will really make this easy. And for that, you really need to connect your environment to extract the vital meta information so that you have insights into what data is there and what kind of policies you need to run against them. As a result, you can make a right governance decision based on that. When we look at Alation, what we do is we basically help our users understand and govern data, and also we manage governance from a central point. We provide a platform where you can curate all your data, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Remember, when we were talking about the cloud migration, the data is still on-prem, so you need to manage that data. So what we do is we capture both, whether it's organizational policies or regulatory policies, and associate them with the underlying data. And what this does is it gives a sense of the policies and the policies that you need to manage for that data, and it does it at a scale. The next thing is we go a step further. Basically, we help our data consumers understand how data should be used or should not be used. So they are, as they're using in their daily workflow, they're using the data, they're getting trustworthy recommendations like, hey, this data has been endorsed, this is a warned data, this is deprecated, and all that helps them make the right decisions on using the data. We heard earlier about people using data from different departments and how can you stop them from using that data. So you can provide tags for data that might be not of your department, where you have role-based access to data as well. Again, we talked about PII information that comes into play. So we can authenticate that PII information so people can have access to data, but there might be sensitive data in that table that they might not have visibility into. So all this really helps them extract data, get them a view of the whole environment, and do the right things. Now, when we talk about the compliance risk, we need to know how the cloud affects the business. So we need to understand how the cloud has been affecting the business, and we need to understand it from a compliance point of view. So basically, businesses need guidance on knowing whether they can move a particular data or they cannot move a particular data or they can touch a particular data. And they need to manage the compliance rules. So, for example, if I take GDPR, GDPR imposes locality, and what does that mean is you need to know whether there's a certain rule associated with the data. The data could be from Sweden, and you cannot move the data from Sweden to US for that matter, for that case. So you need to have that tag. So we provide the ability to tag data so that you can choose what to migrate and what not to migrate. And even once it's migrated, you know that there might be a source to a data, a history that is coming from, let's say, England, and you cannot touch that data. So you have to have that level of visibility. So we help you not only identify data, but help tag data and provide you that extra visibility and provide the deeper understanding to how to even understand the effects of cloud migration. So one is before the migration, one is after the migration. So you can reduce risk by providing that visibility. And we do that with our lineage and impact analysis, where we can give data consumers a clear view on data as it moves into the cloud and the process and how it might be affected and who will be affected. So all that visibility really helps you with your compliance needs. So in summary, we ensure that the governance is met through the data quality, and compliance in the cloud is met as well before and after the migration.
Well, that was comprehensive, and yeah, catalogs and whatnot have come a long way. You know, for the sake of time, I know that we had a lot of questions coming in from the audience. We had a lot at registration. So I want to turn it back over to Jim, and let's open it up to audience Q&A in the remaining time that we have. So Jim, back over to you.
Thanks, Fern. Would you lead a discussion with our panelists, please, to answer this question? What should organizations consider as they build new data pipelines to put data into the cloud?
Yeah, pipelines are important, and everyone's talking about modern pipelines, and is it more than ETL? And Doug, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, at least from our platform's perspective, Delphix, it's an API-first platform. So, you don't, in the past, I wouldn't say that data necessarily was a consideration in typically a pipeline, particularly a software development pipeline. We've done a great deal of work and effort to drive that ability to take and integrate data delivery into a pipeline, regardless of the source type. Our lightweight virtualized clones of data can be delivered very quickly in an automated way as part of a pipeline, and that pipeline can be for development tests, can be analytics, et cetera. So a great deal of flexibility with how that can be done. One area that we've taken great steps and recently introduced is what I'll call continuous masking or continuous compliance. So as data at a source is being created and then being moved directly into the analytics environments, we can actually mask that data as the data moves from source to target, in a automated and continuous fashion. So again, because this data, in this day and age is constantly being changed, constantly moving, adding those capabilities is key in our opinion to helping customers meet the demands and integrating into that pipeline.
Great. Jim, what's the next question?
This one's for Mark. Could you discuss how the data integrity is maintained when transferring data back and forth between the cloud and on-premises?
Sure. I can answer this sort of the way it's handled in Couchbase. And again, I brought it up a little earlier, cross-data center replication, XDCR, which allows that data to be replicated across clusters that are potentially located in different clouds, different data centers, or on-prem. And this is a tooling, a feature that facilitates secure transfer of data, fully encrypted. And it's resilient. If the connection is interrupted for any reason, the replication will recover automatically when connectivity is restored. XDCR replicates data from a specific bucket on a source cluster to a specific bucket on a destination cluster. And data from the source bucket is pushed to the destination bucket by means of an agent. This is how we were able to maintain that integrity. And the agent runs on the source cluster using a database change protocol. And any bucket on any cluster can be specified as a source or destination for one or more replications. And this is how it's bidirectional as well. So it's a way in which we can maintain the security, maintain the integrity of the data because it is Couchbase tooling. It understands the integrity of the data as it was in the source and as it is on the destination and can reconcile those kinds of things. So it's supported between Couchbase Cloud clusters and self-managed clusters as well that you operate outside of Couchbase Cloud. So you can connect a self-managed cluster within a project and then treat it as a source and destination cluster exactly as you would any other. So utilizing those built-in tool sets, at Couchbase, we've really tried to consider data integrity and quality as part of an actual replication and migration process.
Well, here's a question that's on everybody's mind, I'm sure. I hear that cloud usage fees can become more expensive over time than those fees for on-premises. So how do you prevent skyrocketing costs when using data at rest? Bernie, you want to take a shot?
I'll take a quick shot. Definitely, you can control costs by being strategic. The cloud allows you to scale up and scale down. So you have to know your processing patterns to be able to take advantage of these kinds of things. But you can control costs by really taking advantage of that flexibility and elasticity of the cloud. Another thing to look into is things that your IaaS, the CSP provides, like reserved instance pricing. Reserved instance pricing is a discount billing concept in which a CSP will offer significant discounts compared to on-demand cloud computing in return for an organization committing to a specified level of usage. So really do your research and see if you can take advantage of these kinds of strategies to control costs.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add is to control cost, and all this seems simple, but the reality is you need cloud-native applications, right? So when you have cloud-native applications, they can scale up and scale down really quickly. They can move from one vendor, one provider to another provider as well. All you need, again, I'm making it really simple, is an orchestration tool to really figure out how to move things around, and life will be great.
So just a quick comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Fern.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, so foundational to our platform is actually infrastructure efficiency and cost savings. Within our platform, we virtualize data. So if I have a 10 terabyte database source, I'll compress that data onto our platform. And then when I provision a virtual database, I need a compute node. So I need that compute and memory resource, but I don't need any EBS or block storage allocated to that. That's all delivered from the engine. So I need one version or one set of 10 terabytes of data. I can produce 10, 15, unlimited number of copies of that and don't require additional storage for that. So that's one way that you can drive economies within the cloud infrastructure as well as on-premise infrastructure as well with our platform.
Fern, here's the next question for our guests. It would be great if we could plan for a one-time movement of data to the cloud, a once-and-done situation. But the fact of the matter is that we will still have critical data on premises that requires continuous movement. How is this situation best handled?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you could answer that question.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I'll say just foundational to our platform. So staying synchronized with the source data, regardless of where that source data may live, but let's just say on-premise, we can replicate that data to any one of the cloud platforms. Because we're synchronized with that source data, we can then move and keep other locations synchronized with that source data, provision virtual copies, create new physical copies at those locations. We can mask that data in transit, but you can rest assured that all of your data at various locations is synchronized using our platform, again, outside of the capabilities that are inherent, like in Couchbase, et cetera.
All right, here's a last question for all our guests. How does data virtualization fit into a cloud migration strategy? Who'd like to tackle that one?
Well, I guess I'll take a first stab at it. So again, that's the foundation of our platform. So synchronize, source data, compress it, and then, move it and move that virtualized data. Again, I talked about some of the cost savings impact of that virtualized data. So again, that 10 terabyte database no longer is 10 terabytes with a virtual database. At launch, when I provision that virtual data set, it may be megabytes in size. We'll then just look at the individual adaptations or changes to that virtual database, which may increase its size, but at a very modest rate. So we're able to create and drive, some, significant efficiencies in terms of infrastructure, consumption and usage.
Yeah, I would just say that I think that if the question is talking about, data virtualization as in creating an abstraction layer, that's sitting above different platforms, well, that could feed into your strategy, your whole cloud strategy, because if you have a hybrid environment, if you want to use virtualization to sort of, help bring together the data, that is on the cloud and is, on premises, leave it where it is, through this virtual layer. That is that's another approach that we talked a little bit about, but, it is another approach.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing is when people are thinking about data virtualization, they're always thinking bottom. They're thinking about the data. Our approach on that is, yes, we need that to manage it, but then at the end of the day, you need to bridge the gap between the consumers and the data. So we need to provide them visibility as the migration is happening and data is being virtualized. And to provide that, you need to connect to all different kind of data sources.
Yeah, and all that data would, might be in a catalog anyway, right? Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time here, so let me take a moment to thank our speakers today. We heard from Fern Halper with TDWI, Ibby Rahmani with Alation, Doug Smith at Delphix, and Mark Gamble from Couchbase. And thanks again to our three sponsors, Alation, Couchbase, and Delphix. Please remember that we recorded today's webinar, and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues, and don't forget, if you would like a copy of today's presentation, use the click here for a PDF line. Finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, webinars, and information on business intelligence, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. And with that, from all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.